When we talk about sociolinguists' perspectives on sex and gender, it's important to understand that they distinguish between two key concepts: biological sex and social gender. Biological sex refers to the physical categories assigned to us at birth, based on our anatomy. Social gender, on the other hand, involves the cultural traits and behaviors that society considers appropriate for men or women. Now, when we look at gender, it's not simply a binary, like male or female. Instead, gender is often seen as a continuum. Think of it as a range of masculine and feminine behaviors along which individuals can position themselves. This approach recognizes that gender expression can be fluid and varied, rather than fixed. Modern theory also suggests that gender isn't something we're inherently born with. Instead, it's something we accomplish through our daily actions, our behaviors, choices, and interactions. This idea means that gender is an ongoing human achievement, something we actively do within societal constraints. And this brings us to socialization. The process of becoming gendered begins right from birth, starting with the ritual announcement of a baby's sex. From that moment, we're launched into a lifelong journey of learning how to pattern ourselves according to societal expectations about gender roles and behaviors. In the context of sociolinguistics, understanding the distinction between sex and gender helps us see how language plays a role in shaping and expressing these social identities. It's a complex interplay that influences how we communicate and relate to others throughout our lives. In some highly structured tribal communities, you'll find that women and men actually use completely different linguistic forms. This phenomenon is known as gender-exclusive speech. For example, in the Gros Ventre tribe, women say kajatsa for bread, while men say difajsa. Using the wrong form in that context can lead to social stigmatization, which shows how strict these linguistic boundaries can be. Similarly, in the Yanua language, there are gender-differentiated dialects that use distinct class-marking prefixes on nouns, verbs, and pronouns. These morphological distinctions are another way language reflects social roles. Overall, these rigid linguistic boundaries often mirror the clear and exclusive social roles assigned to men and women within these cultures. It's a fascinating example of how language and social structure are deeply interconnected. Let's talk about preferential patterns in Western urban societies. Essentially, while both men and women use the same speech forms, they tend to do so with different frequencies. So, it's not that women or men have completely separate ways of speaking, but rather that there's a tendency for one sex to favor certain styles more often than the other. A key point here is what we call the sex prestige pattern. This is a well-established finding from quantitative research showing that women across all social classes generally use high-prestige, standard language variants more frequently than men do. For example, take the ing variable, words like swimming. Women tend to pronounce it with the standard in, while men are more likely to use the vernacular in form. It's a subtle difference, but it reveals a lot about social and linguistic behavior. Some researchers suggest that this greater use of standard forms by women might be linked to social status awareness. In other words, women might be more conscious of how they present themselves linguistically, using these forms to signal social standing or professionalism. This could be about appearance and social positioning rather than occupation alone. So overall, these patterns highlight how language use is intertwined with social identity and status, and they help us understand the broader theme of how gender influences linguistic choices in our societies. Robin Lakoff in 1973 was a key figure in this area. She proposed that women have a different way of speaking, which both reflects and helps produce a subordinate position in society. She called this women's language, or WL. Lakoff identified specific markers that characterize this speech style, such as tag questions like isn't it, hedges like sort of, and boosters like really or so. These features, she argued, serve to express uncertainty. They act to soften statements and signal a lack of confidence, which can disqualify women from holding positions of authority. Later research by Obar and Atkins challenged this view. They suggested that these so-called women's language features are not exclusive to women. Instead, they tend to appear in the speech of anyone in a subordinate social position, regardless of gender. This led to the idea of powerless language, emphasizing that these features are more about social power than gender alone. This perspective reflects what is called the deficit view, which sees these speech patterns as a deficiency or weakness. Overall, understanding these concepts is crucial because they help us see how language can both reflect and reinforce social hierarchies and power dynamics. Let's delve into the power relations perspective, which is often called the dominance approach. This perspective argues that differences in speech style between men and women are not just random, but actually reflect and reinforce male dominance over women. It suggests that when men speak, they often do so to assert control and maintain power within interactions. Moving on to conversational dominance, studies have shown that in mixed-sex conversations, men tend to dominate the talking time. They also tend to steer the topics of discussion, especially in more formal or public settings. This isn't just about personal style, it's about control and authority in the conversation. Now, regarding interruptions, research by Zimmerman and West is quite revealing. They found that in cross-sex interactions, men are responsible for the overwhelming majority of interruptions. These interruptions often serve as a way for men to assert their dominance, to take control of the conversation, or to reinforce their authority over women. Finally, from this perspective, these interactional patterns aren't just innocent differences. Instead, they are seen as tools within a broader patriarchal system. This system positions women as subservient interactants, meaning that the way conversations unfold often subtly reinforce gender hierarchies. All of these points highlight how power dynamics influence communication styles and serve to sustain unequal social structures. Let's dive into the concept of subcultural divergence, which was popularized by Deborah Tannen. This perspective suggests that men and women speak differently because they are socialized into distinct subcultures right from childhood. Essentially, our communication styles develop based on these different social environments. When it comes to conversational goals, women tend to seek rapport and intimacy through their talk, aiming to build connections and understanding. Men, on the other hand, often seek rapport, which means they focus on gaining status, independence, or conveying information. This difference can cause misunderstandings, especially across cultures or social groups. Now, a key point here is how we interpret things like MHM. For example, in cross-cultural communication, a woman's MHM might signal that she's attentive and listening, while a man's MHM could simply mean he agrees. These unintentional miscommunications are often seen as conflicts, but are really just differences in how signals are used and understood. However, it's important to consider the critique of this view. Critics argue that framing communication as a no-fault matter, where misunderstandings are just due to different socialized styles, can detach language from the power dynamics that influence who has more control or authority in conversations. This perspective might also unintentionally reinforce stereotypes about gender. So, in summary, the difference view highlights these socialized communication styles and goals, but we should also be aware of its limitations and the broader context of power and social influence in language. Let's take a closer look at the division of interactional labor. Pamela Fishman's research revealed that conversations are not always equally balanced. In fact, she found that women tend to take on more of the work to ensure the interaction runs smoothly. They're more actively engaged in keeping the conversation going and successful. Support work is a key part of this. Women often use minimal responses like "me" or "yeah" to signal that they're listening and to encourage the speaker to continue. They also ask 3 times as many questions as men do, which helps signal their attention and elicit responses from their partners. Now, when it comes to topic persistence, we see interesting dynamics. Topics introduced by men tend to be pursued more often by the group. In contrast, topics brought up by women are more likely to be dropped or ignored. This shows a kind of imbalance in how topics are maintained and valued in conversations. And then there are the D-no sequences. Women use these attention-getting devices twice as often as men. These phrases are used to grab attention, ensure they have the right to speak, and secure a response from their conversation partners. Overall, these points highlight how women often take on the more active role in managing interactions, supporting the flow of conversation, and maintaining engagement. It underscores the idea that interactional labor is not evenly distributed and plays a significant role in how conversations unfold.